Hi, I'm Arielle Rahming and I'm a Bahamian abstract painter. I primarily use acrylic paint, but I've recently began using other mediums such as oil pastels, sand, and paper. Yes, I initially started painting at 16, and I took a big break when I went off to school and started working. But about 3 years ago, a friend of mine asked me to paint two pieces for a newly finished apartment. So I did those for her, and it just kind of rejuvenated my love for art, and it got me painting again. Most of my work is inspired by the colors of nature. I'm a nature enthusiast, and so I like to take elements from nature's palettes and put them on canvas to go along with my thoughts. I also really like circles because they represent continuity, and I also really like lines because they represent connections. The hardest part of creating painting for me is deciding when it's done. I tend to look at it repeatedly, and it may seem done one day, and then another day I look at it again, and it seems like, or it may look like, maybe I can add something else to it. So I would say that there is the most difficult part, deciding when it's really finished. When I first started, since I was only using acrylic paint, it would create a really flat surface, and I wanted to add to that, and so I started to use sand because I like the way the paint behaves when it has the sand added to it. And I also like to use layers, and so once I put one layer on, and it has sand. Once it dries, when I go and I put another layer on, it affects the way the new color takes to the canvas, and so it creates a texture that is you can feel it. Not only can you feel it, it's also readily observant. And then I also started using tape, whether it's duct tape, painter's tape. That also adds elements of texture, as well as paper, whether it's brown paper, really thin line paper. At the end of the day, once you put it on and then you add the paint on top of that, it creates a really rich texture that I love, actually. I'm not particularly influenced directly by any artist, but my favorite artist is Jean-Michel Basquiat. And what I admire about his work is the freedom with which he created each of his pieces. There was so much juxtaposition in his pieces, and elements that seemed as if they didn't go together. But in the end, he ended up creating just a really wonderful piece. And so I always admired how liberal he was with his work, and in a way that's how I am. I'm very liberal in everything that I do, and so I don't like restrictions, and so I'd say that's probably the biggest influence that I got from him, and that's why he's my favorite artist. Titles are, believe it or not that important to me, and it's not because I don't think that they deserve titles, but titles are often the last component that I think of when I create a painting. If they can all be untitled, I would be okay with that. But that's just because I don't think of the title before I start. It's always I start, I finish, and then I remember I should probably give it a title.